You ready to go now?
I'm ready to go now, yeah.
Okay. Well now, are you started yet?
Yeah.
Peter persuaded me that in my 88th year there might be some interest for the family in talking about my life in relation to life today. And I don't mind doing it at all, although it's not something I'd aim to do of my own volition. I will want to say pause because the recording of the sound goes along with the picture, and I will want to pause occasionally in my 88th year, as I said, to think. Anyway, to start with, I think you'd like to make the point. I'm going to talk about where I was born rather than what I did there in the first place. And life in the 1920s was very different to now. Much simpler life. There were no cars to start with. I mean, nobody had a car in our community. We were in Furness, you see, Barrow. Barrow was in Furness, that's its name, Barrow-in-Furness. Furness was part of Lancashire then, it's now in Cumbria, but it was always off the map of main Britain, sort of round the corner, you know, and going nowhere, and Barrow was the end of the line, no through traffic. Busy works, high-grade steel works, hematite ore, but it ran out the ore actually. There's still slag heaps looking over to Walney Island, but then after the steel works were going, big shipbuilding started, probably because they got steel there, I don't know about that. But it expanded for the 1914 war, and my dad and a lot of other people came and joined Vickers in the... Well, they came, I think, yeah, they must have come about the beginning of the war, I should think, and they were building up their workforce. Pause. Okay, carry on. It was such an offbeat location, as I say, away from the main part of Britain, that it preserved old ways longer. And I can remember one particular instance, I'd like to mention, getting the milk delivered. We used to have a horse and cart come round with a big can of milk, if you will, and that they used to dip into that with a dipper and pour it into your jug, your household jug. And that was how you got your milk, no bottles, nothing like that. And cars were certainly a luxury. There were nobody amongst our friends who owned a car. My dad had a good friend, Johnny Wardle, who was sort of higher up in the drawing offices and design side of Vickers, who had a car, and he used to have a very good car, Jaguar, if I think it. I can't remember, of course, originally what he had, but he certainly did have nice cars as time went on, and he used to take us up for trips into the Lake District. Very pleasant too. Pause. And the layout of the topography, Barrow is on the headland, and that headland at the very end of it was carved into docks, which really constituted the yard, the Vickers Yard, Barrow-in-Furness shipyard. And that was on what was called Barrow Island, which was sort of separated off from the mainland. So it obviously helped to build docks there. I was born on Walney Island, and I could well have been born in the house, I think, because there wasn't a convenient place to be born apart from the home, except in Barrow. And we had a midwife, Alice Bannister, who lived next door but one at number 11. I lived at number 7. the funny thing was that there were only odd numbers on the street because they didn't get round to having any house numbers on the other side of the road. In fact, the other side of the road simply went on to roads which went off at right angles. But our houses were intended to be semi-detached, but they were built as a sort of E without the middle bit. But as a matter of course, from recruiting for vicars, they turned them into 3 houses, so that the end bits became houses and the middle bit became a house, and very inconvenient house, the middle bit, incidentally. But they got more people in, of course, that way. Pause. Start. A fascinating place to grow up. It was free and open, full of character, and very open for childhood adventures, with shores all over the place. I mean, there was West Shore, which was at the end of Central Avenue, which went up over the island from opposite the Walney Bridge, and there were other shores. There was Bigger Bank, where you have got a cat now. There used to be trams. I can't remember if there were trams when I was in my very early years, but there certainly were tram cars that ran up up Central Drive as far as Southampton Street, on which I was born, and they also went off the other way around, and they went past the schools where I went when I was at school on Walney, and on up to Bigger Bank, as it was called, which was an open grass area, and they had a pond there, which was a paddling pond, I think, and they also had a swimming pool built at one stage, but that closed down eventually. It wasn't very suitable because it was really a rather cold place. In fact, Barrow is one of the windiest lowland sites in England. They say the offshore wind has led them to build 30 windmill towers in 2006. I've never seen them actually, but the internet tells me that there's 30 offshore wind farm towers there now. And on a very good day from Walney, you can see the Isle of Man. It's about 30 miles, 50 kilometres away. Well, it's got to be a good day, and then you can see the mountain tops in the Isle of Man. The recreation beaches were at West Shore mainly, although the shores down from Bigger Bank could be called recreation beaches, but West Shore was a very positive beach where we used to go to swim, and with the wind we used to build shelters from the stones, big stones on the beach, big, about 6 inches round, that sort of size, of all kinds of stones, but there would be granite amongst them, and I suppose some would be limestones, I don't know. But anyway, we used to have to build these shelters to shelter us from the wind, which Walney had plenty. Pause.
Okay.
Well, to describe Walney a bit, it's about 10 miles long, and it bends at either end, so it makes a kind of scarf, a sea scarf around the headland. And it runs roughly north and south, and it's said to be, and I don't know where the other 7 islands are, but it's said to be the 8th largest island of England. I mean, obviously there's the Isle of Wight and there's Anglesey, I don't know where you find the other.
Lindisfarne.
Okay. there are other islands certainly.
Well, the Orkneys, I suppose.
But I don't know how big they are.
The Shetlands?
No, I said England.
Oh, England, okay, yeah. Oh, well.
So, the 8th largest of England, it's said to be. Anyway, never mind that. Vicarstown is what was built on Walney, called by Vickers, of course, the shipbuilders, and it was for the builders, the shipbuilders who Vickers were recruiting, and that's why it was built. And in 1908 they built the bridge of Walney Bridge it was called. Eventually it became called Jubilee Bridge, and that was when it was freed from tolls. From the start in 1908 tolls had to be paid, but in 1935 the Duchess of York, who became the Queen Mother, who's died now of course, but for a long time she was there with the present Queen. She gave the name of the Jubilee Bridge. I don't know what Jubilee they were celebrating at that time. It must have been something to do with King George, I think. Anyway, they removed the tolls, and the bridge opened like that. It's a very fine bridge. It used to have to open up well, so because ships could come through to go to the other side. The yard still continued round on the north side of the bridge, but the main places for launching ships were to the south, just to the south of the bridge. It used to be exciting when they had launches, and the schools used to have a half-day holiday usually, and so we naturally liked to have launches. Anyway, as I was saying, the recreation beaches were on the west side, west shore, but on the channel side, which was not used for bathing at all. But there's lots of private yachts held in the channel there, and we used to go down to the channel side of the, to the island side of the channel to see the launches when they happened. On Walney there were old villages from past times, and people used to walk over to Walney. There was North Scale, which was, say, 2 to 3 miles north from the bridge area, and there was Bigger Village, which was to the south from the bridge area, and that would be 2 miles, again another 2 miles. So in Vickerstown lay between these two old population areas, and Vickerstown itself was split into two by a park, which was down in a hollow, and I lived in the south side of the park. In fact, I regarded that as Vickerstown, but the other end, I presume, which we used to call it the other end, the south north of the park, was probably also part of Vickerstown. It must have been. The island had pause. From the times of walking across until the bridge opened, there used to be ferries run, and they used to be run by the Furness Rail Company. The Furness Rail Company came round all the headland of Furness and right on up round Cumbria. It used to be called Cumberland, of course, and right on up to Whitehaven and further north, and came back, I suppose, into oh dear, mine stopped.
Kendal or something?
Yes,
start again.
Yes, the railway used to come round to Carlisle in the north, and it was a very fine railway to be on. It used to, but they used to run railways up into the lakes, and those have gone now. But Coniston used to be on the end of a branch line of the railway. North of the island, there was Dudden Sands, and an estuary, a very flat estuary, with a small stream called the Dudden Channel, not a real river. And on the far side of the sands was Millom, which was once a prosperous iron mining town, but now dead as far as the mining goes. and still exists in a sort of behind the times way. But behind Milham, to the north of Milham, was Black Combe, which was the only the only mountain that you could see from Walney. It gave a colourful view from Walney to the north. Although the area of Barrow was a cut-off area, it had a very old Furness Abbey, founded by the French Benedictine monks. It became Cistercian after about 20 years from the opening, and it was the second wealthiest Cistercian abbey in the country after Fountains Abbey. An interesting note on the local 50,000 map, which replaced the inch map, you know, are Cistercian ways, which mark various ways on the map around Barrow, around the abbey. And there's one on Walney which runs through Bigger Village and further on down to the south. Let's pause a minute. Yes, start again. That's probably enough about Walney, but the general area, all kinds of shorelines to the north and south of Walney, of Barrow, and of course to the south you had Morecambe Bay, which has opened up, isn't it, for gas? Yes, I think we get gas from Morecambe Bay. It's a great fishing area. That's where they get mussels and cockles and things like that. And some Chinese were lost working there in Morecambe Bay because of the supervisors were very uncaring about their welfare, and they got lost. These Chinese, about 12 of them, was it, or 16, something like that. Beyond the Barrow, of course, up to the north is the Lake District, and between the Lake District and Barrow there are moors, and it used to be a lovely area to live in. We could get out on the moors, and then you get up to the lakes in quite easy distance by train, and later on by bike. And we used to go cycling up to the Lake District. It was lovely, and with rare treats, of course, with cars, if you've got a well-off friend like Johnny Wardle. And that's about all that's worth saying about my surroundings. I think I've said everything to indicate how very much poor it was by relation to the present day, and particularly, I mean, with the cars, which people simply didn't have that facility in those days, and the cars and the roads were clear of car parkings, of course, and there weren't any cars parked on our roads. We used those for roller skating and other things like that. I think pause again. Yeah. Yes, that's got the area out of my way. Now then, about my own early years and the start of stages of life. And I'd like to make the point that my life has been very lucky, and in the RAF I was called Lucky Wallace, and very well deserved, because everybody I flew with pretty well was killed, but I wasn't hurt at all. I didn't get into any kind of accidents, although we had accidents with me aboard. There were accidents that you got away with. Anyway, Lucky Wallace. So, and I go on now being uncommonly fit and happily occupied, and at 88 being fit and having your muscles in good order isn't a bad thing at all. It's very, very nice. Now, to start on the first stage of life, the major factors, of course, that affected our lives were in the USA. Well, it was in the world affected by the Great War. And outside of the USA, the countries were very depressed after the war. But then, in 1928 or 9, was it, became the Great Depression, which was triggered in the USA by reckless investment, which led to a stock market crash. And another feature of the depressed life, of the depressed economic life, was the old gold standard had become unusable. It had been the basis of world trading. You used gold as the standard for currencies, but that became unworkable after the Great War, and then came the Great Depression. So all through the, well, till about 1937, I suppose it must be, all through the 20s, the prices of things like houses went down. They didn't go up, they went down. It wasn't like buying a house today as a kind of investment. You invested in a house, yes, but the price didn't go up in a natural course of events. It went down because it had got old and that sort of thing. It was quite different. I'm just trying to make that point. And unemployment was very hard. It was mainly a working man's world. Women didn't have jobs so much in those days. I mean, yes, they had jobs like nurses and midwives and milkmaids, what have you, but they didn't have serious jobs, whereas the men expected their wives to be at home doing housework and looking after the family, and to have to pay for them, to earn enough to keep them. And it's, as I say, a very, very different world. And unemployment in those days was hard. If you were unemployed, it wasn't easy to find new work. Vickers was a good employer and managed to keep employment going through my dad's working life. He was never unemployed. I think there were times, I think, when work was less in demand, and they probably they may have gone on to part-time, I don't remember, but by and large Dad worked very hard in the jig and tool shop of the Vickers, which was making the tools for building ships, and he was a particularly skilled fitter, and he had a very valuable machine which was kept in a glass case, and at least it was in the latter years of my memory of him working there. And they used to have a chap coming over from Switzerland to advise on the way they used the machine, to see that it was kept in good order and that sort of thing. So the work was hard, and Dad was very interested in the work he did. I can remember him having talks with a friend about what was going on in the shop, you know, and that's the jig and tool shop, and how they would deal with certain jobs and that sort of thing. The shipyard was the world for Barrow. I mean, the workmen used to walk into work from Walney and from all around Barrow, and they would walking in their overalls. I don't know what they did about rain. I suppose they used to wear a mat. I don't remember any umbrellas being used anyway. And the time of day was marked for you by the buzzers of the yard. I think one used to go off, it was either 7 or 7:30, and there'd be one at 5 or 5:30, and there'd be one at 1 o'clock. Or was it? No, maybe it's 12 o'clock, I don't know. Anyway, 3 buzzers a day marked the passage of the day. And as I say, the town was the shipyard largely, apart from all the shops and some smaller industry. The street names on Walney, now there's a thing, they were all called after ships that had been launched by Vickers. Southampton Street was one, Dover Street across the way, which was a different kind of street to ours. I've described my street, haven't I? In the houses on our street, on Southampton Street, were spaced out. They were going to be separated, semi-detached. They had gardens all round, and at the back too. And then there was a similar avenues, and they were called avenues, although Southampton was a street, with these sort of houses, semi-detached, tri-detached really. In the end they became, not semi-detached. But the streets that were opposite us, they were much more lower class, if you will, working class. I suppose there were better paid chaps came into our houses, and the lowest paid went in the other streets, and their houses faced directly onto the pavement, and at the back they had a backyard, and in the backyard they had the lavatory at the end of it, on the lane at the back. Our houses did have a lavatory inside, and the gardens at the back went down to a narrow, very narrow lane, which led onto the gardens of the houses opposite. The lane was probably no more than 4 feet wide. But in the other streets, the back street would be a usable width street, because there used to be a gate into the yards, and well, they must have been fairly ordinary to live in, those houses, I suppose. But anyway, that's the way it was, and we used to look straight down Dover Street, over towards Barrow, I suppose. The houses round about us, varying in quality, all had young workers in them, and they had young families. And our sort of semi-detached ones, I suppose, slightly superior to the other streets, that we used to associate more with these youngsters from these houses. But we used to play out in the streets, of course, and roller skating. And four-wheelers and a board are very popular, and there was one street, Bristol Street, which had quite a nice slope for going down on the board. And I remember, I must have been 5, 6, 7, I really can't remember the age, but I went down on one of these boards, I think with wheels without tyres on. It must have been, because anyway, I got my left arm apparently against one of these wheels, and it cut down to my butt, to the bone, and I didn't notice it. Somebody said, "Your arm's bleeding," so I looked, and there was. So went off home, and they had to get a doctor, and they put, I think, 6 stitches in, and it's still on my arm, the mark.
Wow.
Just there.
You're going to show it to us then?
Well, I can do, but there's not much left of it. But yes, there it is. There.
Hold on. Oh, I got it, yeah.
But it's very much disappeared now. But anyway, that was the biggest excitement in my life, I suppose.
In terms of the accident, that's not bad. Touch wood.
Oh, I've had worse accidents than that. When I was working for the matriculation, and I was out in the country lane and on a bicycle with Jim Aylan, and a motorbike came around the corner and knocked me off, and I was unconscious for a while, and got home, and I was really badly upset for my exams, and I think they were very tolerant in my French oral of the fact that I had a headache.
You had a bad head, yeah.
Yes, anyway, that's no, that's ahead of time, really, I'm telling you that.
All right.
Because coming back, we used to have pals all round us, we used to have gangs. There was down the road, there was at the bottom of Southampton Street and to the left, there was a road going off, and that went along by a sand pit, which had obviously been created at the time they built the houses. I suppose they used the sand to make their cement, and it had a kind of hollow in it and a grass area up above, and I can remember having gangs, and some gang would go up on top and our gang would be down the bottom and we'd throw stones at each other and things like that. There was nobody that hurt very much, nobody threw stones very accurately, I guess. We were pretty young, but anyway, it was a little excitement. Other excitements, of course, were walking along to the school, Wallace Central School, which had a primary area and an infants, and of course I was in the infants up till the age of 10 plus, 11 possibly. No, I might have been 11 by the time I left there, yes, I suppose I was. I'm not sure about that. But anyway, we used to walk along the bottom on the opposite side from the sand pit. There was a pavement, and then that pavement turned into an ashes pavement, if you will, just a walkway along with ashes that had been put down, and on those ashes we used to play marbles. I mean, you know, it was a level area, and we used to make holes and play holey and play ringy. I think we met even a squarey too. I can't remember all the games. I do remember the games very well, and we used to use steelies to fire into the rings, and you'd put so many marbles in, clay marbles, painted coloured clay marbles in the ring, which you would try and if you could knock them out, they became yours. You see, some boys were very good. I was only very moderate, but it was good fun. And holey, you had a little distance to the hole, and you had to get the marbles into the hole if you got them into the hole. Well, I don't really know what the rule was there, but anyway, yeah, some of you won marbles in some way. And then there was cigarette cards, of course. In those days, every packet of cigarettes had cards in, and they used to be collected ardently by the children. 50 cigarette cards in a pack. Used to be very often sports, but birds and things like that, and they used to be very good. And you'd collect them, and you'd get your dad to bring his cigarette cards home. And cigarette smoking, of course, was the natural thing to do. Everybody smoked. Nowadays, it's frowned on, of course. I know there's still people who do it, but in those days, it was the thing to do. And as you grew up, you became grown up when you started smoking. And pause. The cigarette cards, of course, you would put a cigarette card up against the wall, and the other chap would try and knock it down with his cigarette cards, flicking them at it. If he knocked it down, I suppose he'd have 6 goes or something like that. If he knocked it down, he got that cigarette card to keep, and so forth. So that was the cigarette card games. But of course, more importantly, was swapping cigarette cards, sets and things, and it was really, and of course you had albums to put them into. That was an exciting thing. It was better than stamp collecting anyway. Although that was popular enough with some people. I did it myself for a stage. I never got into being very excited about stamps, although I did get some rather good looking ones at one time. Anyway, the other things we used to do, of course, in passing time, well, we spent time down on the shore at weekends a lot, and even in the evenings in summer, I suppose. But Walney was not a warm bathing place, except for limited periods of the year, but when it was warm, it was very lovely. Coming back to the going to school, we went on to school, and we ended up on Mycassa Street, which is where the infants was. And I've mentioned this before, but of course it's got lost now. Mycassa Street was where the post office was, and there was other things down there. Shops. I used to get there, I can't remember what they were now, long pods, which you used to like to eat. Can't remember the name of them. My memory's gone, of course. But my Castle Street was the place where somebody asked me where my mum was, and I said, "Oh, Mum's down her Castle Street, Mother's Castle Street, Mum's Castle Street," or something. For my Castle Street, my Castle being a place in Japan, of course, the name of a ship. In the ship at the school, we had naturally a playground and all sorts of things there. But the great thing there would be the scraps. Some couple of chaps would fall out and take their, well, I don't know if they had anything to take off, but anyway, they'd all wind up their sleeves and they'd have a scrap. Somebody would get a busted nose or a black eye or something occasionally. And elder lads would stand around and cheer them on, you know. I was never a scrapper myself, I always avoided it, but F. Jackson next door, who I was very friendly with, he used to be quite good at having a scrap. He used to rather like it, I think. He was a big, heavy lad too, so he didn't do too badly when he had a scrap. Our houses were separated by a brick wall. At my garden side, it was on the level of the garden, down, but it dropped down 4 or 5 feet down to the level of their house, which was down the hill from our house, you see. And we used to sit on this wall, which was standing up from their garden very regularly, and I suppose it was rather a popular place to be on the wall of the garden. The house, I haven't described the house, have I? 7 Southampton Street. Well, number 5 was down, because I've said that about the houses being all odd numbers. Number 5 was where I've lived, and there was this wall between us. But 7 Southampton Street had a living room looking down Dover Street, and at the front end on the left-hand side there was a larder which was cut off from where the cooking was done because it was the other side of the front door area, the hall, and the hall opened from the front door into that area and went off up to the right up the stairs, and along the stretch just before you got to the stairs there were the hooks where you'd hang your hats and coats. No hats, coats. And then you went straight through a door into the living room, which had a fire on the opposite side. It wasn't a very big room, by the way. I doubt if it was more than, well, might have been 12 feet wide. I think it might be less too, 14 by 12, I think it could be. And as I say, over in one corner was the larder. At the other end was the entrance into the scullery, I suppose it was originally, because there was a boiler fitted in one corner which was lit with coal or coke or something, and that was a boiler with a flat top, closed down on top, and then to the right of that there was a window, an up and down window, which there was a sink underneath, and that, I'm sure, in the early years was where we used to wash, and there wasn't a lot of room in that room. With the time you got a mangle in there and a table to eat round, and I suppose Mum used to cook somewhere. Where would she cook in those days? She must have been a cooker alongside the boiler, I guess. So it was a very cramped little kitchen, scullery combined, and then off to the right from that there was another door, and that to the left of that was the back door immediately, with a couple of steps, and to the right was the coal house indoors, with a door, and then beyond that, just facing you as you came out the scullery, there was the door into the toilet. No bath, just the toilet, and I don't think there was a wash basin in the early days. I think it was later on fitted up with a wash basin. Anyway, that was our house in the first place. Oh, cosy enough, and we had a fire in the living room, of course. I can remember Mum lighting the fire while I sat on the settee and watched her. And on that settee was where I can remember one thing happening in the very, very early times of my life, and it could have been within the first 2 years, I suppose it was. They circumcised me for some reason. Obviously I must have had some problem. I don't think it's because I was Jewish. When that was being dressed afterwards, Nurse Bannister used to come in. I can remember Nurse Bannister very vividly from the pain I used to have with my private parts in those days. Anyway, that was my first memory of Nurse Bannister. She came back into our lives later on, but I'll come back to that later on too. But she had 2 boys. She was a widow. She'd lost her husband in the war, I guess, as a sailor. Anyway, pause. I carry on. The back door was, with a couple of steps, was where you could look across to the houses at the back or down to wherever was next door. Sit on the steps very often and make bows and arrows and things like that. And I remember being very small, appreciating the carnations. They used to have a nice taste or something. I used to eat the seedlings or something. I can't remember, but anyway, I remember liking carnations and odd flowers in flower beds. Dad wasn't a great gardener. He did grow some vegetables, not with any enthusiasm. It was a rough piece of garden going down to the bottom, but didn't go out of our garden to the lane. You'd go into the next door area, but there was one path down to the gate at the bottom onto the lane. And it was the same at the front, of course. There was a common entrance to the houses with a central pavement down onto a paved area between the 3 houses, filled in the space between the houses, and the 2 end houses had a pavement, one pavement wide sort of thing round the house to the back, and they had a little bit of side garden as well as a bit of front garden. So that you went in through the central gate and went over to your own front door from there. All this was improved later on when Vickers, and that must have been before I was 11, I think, yeah. Vickers stopped renting the houses. At first they were only available to rent from Vickers, but they eventually came round to selling them to the occupants who wanted them, and Dad bought his, and from then on he was able to make improvements. There were no improvements offered by Vickers, and you couldn't get any made when they were renting. But when we bought the house, he then had a bigger area built on the back, outside the back door, a flat area with a house sort of extension of the house. Yes, I suppose it was properly roofed, and that would be the kitchen proper, and then the scullery was cleared of its boiler, and the mangle went into the extension, and so it became. You want me to stop? Yeah. Your mum, after I'd made, well, it was when I'd left Barrow. Yeah, that's right. Anyway. He lived a little way away from where we lived, and Southampton Street was, as I said, a fairly sloping street, and then there was Dover Street went off at a right angle to it. These are all houses which...
If it goes away, yeah, it's gone. Oh, it's going back again now.